fuck the script.
Fuck the script, that's right. Chop chop.
The Nazis followed in pursuit, but of course, because all the fields were scorched, there wasn't many resources they could capitalize on. So then, of course, on the way, they come across this farmer, and they decide that burning his fields isn't enough. They burn his children. So after they burn his children,
Holy fuck.
they continue in pursuit after the Russians and engage in a very long and tenuous battle of attrition. Of course, this gives the farmer more than sufficient time to not only expand upon his fields, but fully regrow them, okay? But, and listen carefully, this regrowth was for no harvest. It was for them to only be burned yet again. However, there's a key difference in the smell that they give off. It's not just the smell of wheat, it's the smell of flesh. The flesh of Nazis. Of course, this meant that the Nazis were already retreating after their horrible defeat. They were retreating with freezing feet and rats gnawing at them to the core of their bones. But, as all songs of ice and fire go, fire was very much in this tale. And all it took was one little spark from a farmer who had lost his fields and his kids. And so, the blaze arose. And it grew. It grew oh so much like the very wheat. But soon there was little more than ash left in its wake. The ash, not only of wheat, but of Nazis.
What this man did next. Easy. Went to St. Petersburg. Changed his identity. Got a little flat, got a little room in a flat of some woman. Enlisted in the KGB school though, and at some point got sent to Berlin. Rather aspiring thing. Next, he spent some time in Berlin going up through the ranks. What happened after that? Putsch in Berlin itself, which this man coordinated. It's well enough to be sent back to Moscow, actually back to St. Petersburg, as a guard of the mayor of St. Petersburg, Sobchak, who you might know, I don't know. Anyway, after that, this man was just chilling, you know? But what he remembered that he has to turn entire fucking Russia, actually no, Ukraine, sorry, she wasn't Ukrainian, Ukraine into scorched land. Did he do that? Oh yes, he did. In 2001, he became the president of Russia. And then, shit just went down, boy. Just like rubble. Just like immigrants should do. Fuck you. I'm talking to you, immigrant scum. That's right. If you will once again knock on my door and ask me about fucking Jesus Christ, I will crucify you right in my fucking room. And you know what? No one will fucking find out of your body under all the noodle packs I have hidden. After all the fucking pizza boxes, you'll be covered. You'll be literally a grave, a tomb, a fucking cathedral just for you. You'll turn into a living church of trash. And slowly degrading and rotting away you will be with the remains of some old
There was a deep, a dark, an untold part to this story. And this revolves around someone who our old farmer considered, and I'm sure on some levels would still consider, to be very close to him. You see, when the fields were burned, the farmer was so tunnel visioned, so entrapped by his motive for revenge, that he did not see what lay around him. You see the ash, the blackened, charred bodies of his children. One of them continued to breathe. And breathed he did for many days. However, eat he did little. But the charred remains of his own sister. He would lie there, and he would gnaw on the bones, what was left of them, watching his father go out to the fields and blindingly pollinate them with what he could. And this continued. He could not cry out for help, for his own throat had been burned. He could not move his limbs, for they too were burnt. It was all burnt. And all he could remember was black and orange. The orange of the flame and the black of his charred skin. And so the father, the villager, once the seeds were pollinated, a few tough days of work in his eyes, he would spend the remainder of the time drinking away his sorrows, unaccepting of who he had really become, and the hell to which he had condemned his children, now his child, unbeknownst to him. He would hear the raps on the door, and later the cries of his son. Despite all the storm and rain that constantly poured over his little cottage that he kept himself shut in. But he would dismiss it all as mere illusions, trickery of the mind. And of course, the alcohol did him wonders too. And so the child, he wept. He wept with sorrow like the rain that wept, that spat onto him. And yet the fields around him grew. They enjoyed the rain. They loved its taste. But the taste of home had gotten very bitter for this child. And what do children do when they don't like the taste of something? They spit it back. So spit he did on the ground, on the cottage, and then he left in pursuit of something greater.
Of a greater spit.
What? Soon enough, the child found he could move again, and soon he regained his sense of his speech, somewhat of his vision, his hearing, and he was found more than adequate to enlist in the Russian army that was now sweeping across Europe, chasing the Nazis. I'm sure they too were in no shortage of children, and making young children mature into adults far too quickly. The traumas of war were, well, nothing new to him, for he had been to hell and back. And so, he found a pal there. A pal that would bandage him and help him sell his story. A story that he was, in fact, a leper. Leprosy was no joke. It was not something to be taken lightly. However, try telling the drunk Russian forces that they would leave him battered and bruised. But it was hard to tell. Nobody really got to see his skin. They would call him the bandaged one. Some would call him Mummy. And some would treat him like one. The Russians got desperate too. Eventually, they managed to cross the Berlin border. And he found himself in, well, what some on the eastern side would consider the land of the free. A refugee. During that time, he rather quickly developed the skill to read and write. And he would travel across Europe during these days as a refugee, trying to pick up whatever benefits and social healthcare, welfare he could. The very leech on society. He had accepted his role, or so you would think, until he sets his sights on Britain. This leech of a person that should have died in a fucking field survived, and yet wanted more than survival. He wanted to rebuild, restructure society. Interesting thing ambition is it not? Well, Britain itself had suffered some terrible losses in World War II, and that news he was no newcomer to. Of course, he saw this as his opportunity to make up for his own personal fear, the fears of the past, and to help regrow the fields. But this time, not fields of wheat, fields of society that would become modern-day Britain. The next step for the now young man was to enter the political sphere in Britain. And of course, bring about change. The change that all politicians promise but never deliver. A simple farmer boy should not have meddled in the affairs of rich Cambridge graduates that have studied law for years. And what a fool he was. For in trying to do so, he had everything taken from him. The poor thing now. The one that tried to bring about change became the very victim of change. So what became of such a man? His existence, his purpose in life, any meaning it may have formed, began dwindling like this candle. Ever so frail, ever so fragile, ever so bound to melt by even the slightest flame. There was a void in this man's life. A void that grew deeper, and meaning grew lesser. Depression started to kick in, and kick it did, with the force of not only Bruce Lee, but Chuck Norris, and perhaps a whole martial arts school. So, what meaning could he then find? He found opportunity in technology. As many do, the saviors of the modern day. And one might say, he filled a little niche, making comedy sketches, playing games, uploading videos. But that's not where his niche really lied. There is a reason you never get to see this man's face. The one who goes by the alias of Deathstroke. There is a reason that you do not get to see his face, nor his cupboards, nor his apartment, nor his kitchen. But if you were to enter that space, even for a moment, the smell would remind you of something. The cupboards would reveal something. And the man's mask would become the very reminder of fear that you dread when you wake up and you cannot move your limbs. The sleep paralysis you feel is no stranger to him. That is why you must fear him more than anything. The reminders you will sense are reminders of how he enjoyed the taste of his sister's charred skin a little too much. And why stop at his sister?